Time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all.
Morning.
Al, I'd like to start with you, and it just seems like only a few months ago, very few people, especially political pundits, would never have given Donald Trump the thought of being a credible candidate for the 2024 election. Yet as of today, he remains the preferred candidate in the Republican Party. But more importantly, Trump clarifies that unless he has health problems, he'll be running again. And the Republican establishment, including people like Chuck Grassley, don't seem to hesitate to embrace him. Does this help or hurt Democrats in the 2022 midterms? And given the state of the country at this point, do you think Trump has a chance to return to power in 3 years?
Probably both Craig and I need to do this caveat that nobody can really predict what Trump will do because he is somewhere off the radar screen. And I did predict at the end of last year that he would fade eventually, that his friends would begin to desert him and his enemies would come all out after him. And I'm not gonna change that prediction. Trump gets a lot of attention because he knows how to get attention. And he goes to rallies, but the truth is rallies are like crowds in a campaign. They don't really mean very much because you can get a lot of people in a country this big to go to anything. But they don't necessarily represent a large percentage of the population. Let's think about Trump. First of all, he's a loser, and he's not going to be president again. He lost the presidential election by 2.5 million votes in 2016 and won because of the Electoral College. And he lost it by more than 7 million votes last time. And my guess is, first of all, that's not a good trend. And my guess is he'd lose by more. Most people think that because of his own selfishness, he cost the Republicans the United States Senate by telling people not to vote in the Georgia runoff until they solved his, fraud problem. When in the House in 2018, when he tried to make it about himself and he wasn't on the ballot to draw his voters out, the Republicans suffered in popular vote terms the worst loss because it was the best Democratic year ever, and only redistricting kept it from being a lot greater than it was. I guess we'll see again in Virginia this year whether he has any pull. But so he's a loser. Secondly, his problems haven't gone away. He's still got legal problems. We still don't know what Cy Vance is going to do in New York and whether the Manhattan district attorney will indict him and his company for criminal activity. He's not out of the woods on January 6th yet. The Congress may be sort of klutzy in how they do their committees, but they are on the path. And we're pretty early in that process. We've got a long time to go. He's considered viable, I guess, as a candidate for 2024 because he has a hold on a plurality of a decreasing party, and that's his power. And his power is, because of that, his power is in primary season, because most Republican office holders don't want to be primaried by a Trump person. But primary season passes. And then you go into a general election and you really see what his impact is. I saw a poll recently, I think, that said 43% of Republicans want him to run again. Well, that's 43% of a pretty small party. We're talking about less than 15% of the electorate. My pollsters used to tell me you can get 14 or 15% for anything. So, that's not really a position of strength, except if you watch cable TV or because, he has anecdotal events like rallies that they can get a big, a lot of attention to. And the final thing is the guy's crazy. Yesterday he got mad because I guess there was a court in Georgia that said for the 59th time that your fraud case is silly. And so he issued a statement telling Republicans not to vote in 2022 or 2024 until the 2022 or 2020 fraud election is solved, as he says. Not too long ago, he endorsed Stacey Abrams for governor of Georgia, the Democratic activist, because Brian Kemp, the governor, said he wouldn't overturn the Georgia election. To me, the biggest problem with Trump is sort of the legacy he's left in state legislatures that are passing all these laws that could undermine future elections. And that's why I've said, and I will probably say every week on this show, that the one place I think Democrats ought to carve out an exception to the filibuster is to pass a voting rights a voting rights act that protects future elections.
Craig, all that makes perfect sense to me, but I also know that we're dealing with higher than expected inflation. We've got a supply chain problem. We've got the aftermath of COVID. People are leaving their jobs at record numbers. So I'm looking at a climate that's not particularly great for an incumbent. But what do you think of the Trump phenomenon at this point?
I really do agree with much or most of what Al said. I have a hard time imagining Trump getting elected. I would emphasize a couple of points. One, I think he has continuing ongoing legal issues. I actually think there's also a question of health. Running again nationally requires a huge amount of stamina, and I don't know that he has that. I think the polling, I would say, showing in the 40% percentile of Republicans saying that he's their choice. Al is quite right. The people who identify themselves as Republican voters, that number has declined. But the other part of those surveys, it's really a kind of a name identification process. I mean, you've got people, they listed, I think in one list I saw 15, 20 people, and the names are not known to a lot of people. I will, as a footnote and a little bit of a local commentary, say I was surprised that Governor Hogan got 0% in this poll. If anybody should have been pleased, maybe it's Liz Cheney. Now, she only got 2%, but think of this. Here's Liz Cheney, who just suddenly emerged as the anti-Trump candidate, but she's scoring higher than a Republican governor who's been touted as having great potential. So these polls of Republican choices, I don't think mean a lot. However, the reason I think your question is really an important one, and one not to take lightly, is that the momentum seems to be going out of the Biden effort. And I've been accused of giving them a lot of leeway and a lot of credit, but the fact is we're in October, and the victories have not been put on the board yet. And to use the metaphor, whatever I used earlier, you're either taking money out of your political bank account or putting it in. They're not putting very much in. And that has consequences. Now, it's not to say they won't get legislation passed this year, but boy, if you have to go to the State of the Union next year without a major accomplishment in a Congress that your party controls, you have a problem. The other problem that I saw pop up this week, I'm sure Al did too, is in the Gallup poll. The Gallup poll is now showing, after about an 8 or 9 year climb in people favoring more governmental action, got up to over 50% with the election of Biden. It's now fallen below 50%. And that's what I mean about momentum dropping. The national consensus behind some of these major spending programs is beginning to decline, in my view. And I would say that's the significance of the Gallup poll. And that makes passage more difficult. It really, to me, means they must come to the table and successfully negotiate before the holidays, before people leave. And by the way, that's what Congress typically does. It is right up against the holidays when most of the action happens. So it's not like time has run out on them. But I do think that the failure to achieve some legislative results makes more viable the talk of a Republican challenger. And right now, Trump is at the top of that list. So that'll be the name that's bantied about.
I mean, do you see that there could be the House of, the loss of both houses? And
So if you're asking me, my quick answer, and Al's more a student of this than I am, my answer is it gets more difficult. On the other hand, the 2022 general election is in November. It's more than a year away. And there's a lot of time for developments, both positive and negative. But it certainly begins to embolden challengers in some of these districts. As for Trump in the midterm, I think that Al's point was right. I think people like Grassley and others, while they may not enjoy the opportunity of standing next to him as he praises them, they sure as heck don't want him, down the road opposing them. So they accept this, they swallow hard, and they get an endorsement in the primary to prevent a loss, and they hope to then win in the general. I don't think Trump candidates will fare well in a general election. And so if he gets some of his people, his followers nominated next year in primaries, if they win primaries, I think they'll have a tougher time in a general election. But I do think it's less about Trump and it's more about achieving something. I mean, that was the promise that the country was given by a Democratic president, a Democratic leader of the Senate, Democratic speaker. And they really do have to deliver on that. And I think people are beginning to get more restless, for sure.
Al, you have the last word.
The question that we started with was not whether the Republicans would do well in 2022, but what Trump's impact would be. And they're very different things. Because I think Trump's impact on 2022 is likely to be negative in two ways. One, there probably, as we have had over the last 10 or 15 years in Republican primaries, because of Trump, they're probably going to nominate for the Senate at least one or two unelectable candidates in states where the Republicans would ordinarily win. And that helps the Democrats, and the Democrats may need that to be able to control the Senate because, it's 50-50. I looked at the Cook report in the last week and, there are 9 seats that they say are contested, but you never know about that. And they slightly lean to the Democrats right now, but that will change dramatically over the next year, and we don't know which way. So the House is, the average since 1942, I looked at every election, and the average loss of the presidential party in an off-year election is 27 seats. So, the odds are pretty good. The Republicans, again, are going to win the House. And but that goes to the second way that Trump will be a negative. If he becomes the issue in a general, that could turn a lot of seats because the key voters are college-educated voters, and they don't like Trump. But they may not turn out as much in an off-year election. But and they also are in swing districts, and they often vote Republican for Congress. But the trend has been lately since Trump that they've been going strongly Democratic. So if he gets his nose in the middle of a lot of those swing district races, he could again force a big Democratic turnout among college-educated voters. It would make it harder, but probably still likely that the Republicans will win the House. Just a quick comment on Biden's achievement. We've gotten to a point in our debate, and again, maybe this is because of cable TV and everybody's got it in their face 24 hours a day, but, you know, maybe I am missing something, but Biden passed a $1.9 trillion Recovery Act that created a child tax credit that is very popular. And it has been, you know, and ordinarily that'd be considered a pretty big achievement. I don't think there's ever been a bill that big. I mean, what I suspect is going to happen is, because you sort of see this happening in the debate, even though as I watch TV, they keep saying Manchin wants 1.5, and the progressives want 3.5, and nobody knows what's in the bills. But I think they're going to pass the infrastructure bill, which is a $2.2 trillion bill, pretty big, with a lot of it is really important because our economic infrastructure needs to be rebuilt. And secondly, I think what's going to happen is we're going to get a Biden Build Back Better bill that will include some climate change, will include the extension of the child tax credit, will maybe take one or two other main initiatives, and I'm thinking preschool, which is something that people can identify with, and particularly after this experience of the pandemic, where they've been kept at, where children have kept parents at home and out of the workforce, is going to be very popular. The Democrats will have something to run on if the economy comes back. But to me, more important than passing either of those laws is, just hammering down on mandates and vaccine and mandates and getting people vaccinated, no matter how much people yell, the anti-vaxxers yell, because if you stomp out COVID, you've changed the way people feel about the country. And there would be nothing better for the Democrats. Again, it may not be enough, but nothing better for the Democrats than to go into 2022 with people thinking the country's back to normal.
Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you very much indeed. We'll be seeing you next week, where I believe we'll be able to talk about the Virginia election. So until then, thanks so much.